Harley Pasternak has blocked me on Insta. I guess that's better than him drugging me and threatening to take me and my away from my children, take me back to La La Land because play dates with the kids are just not going to be the same. We should probably discuss how we got there because that is a pretty crazy development. How did we get there where Harley Pasternak, who definitely has links to the deep state, is blocking little old me? Well, it's probably because we have been noticing some things over here. Obviously, on Thursday, we started unpacking the Bieber plot. I went on a tip, a very strong tip that Bieber's actually waging a private battle. And I just spiritually felt when I was reading the headlines, like, where have I seen this all before? Suddenly, a person finds Christ, and the next thing you know, are being told he's crazy, he's on drugs, his relationship is being monitored every second by people in the media who are essentially trying to create a rift between him and his wife. So let's dial this back a bit. Let me ask you guys a pretty basic question. How many times, realistically, can a major successful artist that is engaged in a fight for their freedom suddenly become insane, drug addicted, and then die relatively young? Okay, if you just had to put it within some odds, what would you say the odds are on that? Now, I want to be clear, I had never been down the Prince rabbit hole, and I'm not totally there yet. I'm just beginning. And I did not realize that you can quite literally draw a direct line from Prince to Michael Jackson, to Ye, and then now to Justin Bieber and the things that they have been saying and what they are trying to do. Now, I did not grow up in a Prince household beyond a couple of his major hits, namely Raspberry Beret and When Doves Cry. So when he died on April 21st of 2016, at the very young age of 57, I did not venture to look beyond the media headlines in terms of that story. I just registered the official story. The official story was that he died of a drug overdose, an accidental opioid overdose. This is from the New York Times. They said, quote, Prince was found dead in the elevator of his home in Chanhassen, Minnesota on April 25th, 2016 by Mr. Kirk Johnson and others after he ingested the fatal amount of fentanyl, which is often used to manufacture counterfeit pills that are sold on the black market as oxycodone and other pain relievers. Okay, so that's the official story. What is the unofficial story? What is the unofficial story of Prince? Well, I'm just learning that throughout his entire career, this is the guy who quite literally turned his name into a symbol so that record executives could not benefit off of his name. Like, he was willing to just be a symbol so that he could have ownership over his name. He was constantly at war with the executives at the record labels. And I want to show you this clip of him discussing how he viewed record labels. This is from 2004. Take a listen.
Ever since my third album, I wasn't really taking large advances from the recording companies. I was recording the albums myself in my own studio. So the way I looked at it, I owned the work because I paid for it. And I did all the work. I created it, so I felt like it should belong to me. That said, the companies felt otherwise, and they would always hold this contract up and say, well, you signed it. And I say, well, I understand that. It's not like I want to leave. I just want to, talk about this thing and see if we can't make it more fair. Of course, they wouldn't change, because if they changed, they wouldn't really exist. And that's kind of the situation we're in right today. They're not going to exist much longer. If we can work together, then it's going to be, everybody will kind of move into a situation where they do what it is that they're qualified to do. If they're going to be indeed a delivery service, then that's fine. But even FedEx doesn't say that they own the thing that they ship, right?
Actually such an interesting point that I had never even thought of. Like, how do the record labels just decide if they own your voice? They should be operating like FedEx. Like, we can distribute your music, but you don't own the thing that you are distributing, similar to FedEx. He also discussed very early on something that we now know to be quite intentional when we think about the MK Ultra program, but just the degeneration of music over time. Like, people were playing instruments, people had these nice themes that they were singing about, and suddenly there was this radical shift, and music has become increasingly more raunchy and more pornographic. Well, he was early to that game, and here's what he had to say to MTV News about that degeneration. Take a listen.
What was it that you were listening to in music today that made you say, I've got to put some more stuff out there? You have to do this.
Mainly I sensed a great deal of negativity and entropy in the music. there's a disintegration going on that we really have to address. Our values have been lessened to a great degree. VH1's been pretty cool. They don't show too much craziness on their channel, but other Viacom channels do. So I think that we should address this as a community as to what it's doing to the culture. People can say all they want to, that there's no reason for these kids to listen to music and then go shoot somebody. But, you know, there's something that's triggering these buttons.
Just incredible, because like I'm just telling you, this is the first time that I've ever heard this, because I didn't follow Prince in his musical career. And I just can't believe that he was having this exact same discussion that we know Michael Jackson was having and then Ye was having. And just to show this to you again, I know I showed it to you on Thursday. Let's just listen to what Michael Jackson was saying about these same record labels.
Record companies really, really do conspire against their artists. They steal, they cheat, they do whatever they can, especially the black artists. Sony, Tommy Mottola. Tommy Mottola is the president of the record division. He is a mean, he's a racist, and he's very, very, very devilish.
And, you know, YouTube last year took down, I still never got clarity on why they did this, but they took down my interview with Ye in the midst of all of the fire when he was being called crazy by the press. I sat him down at my home and just had a discussion with him because I wanted to sort of capture that moment. And believe it or not, he was talking about the exact same thing, this treatment of artists, really making it sound like a modern form of slavery. Here is Ye and what he had to say in 2022.
We can't just say, oh, it's okay for people to like super complicate deals and to collude on deals and to not look at us as human beings, as artists and athletes and actors, that we have to be willing to like stand up for that to be able to change something. And we need to come together as a society to be the first civilization that actually became civil.
Gosh, it all sounds so reasonable, right? When you hear it like that, but that's not what the media tells us about these people. I mean, when you start speaking like that as an artist or as a podcaster or as somebody who's within any kind of contract, suddenly the media comes down on you hard. And like we said, Wacko Jacko. Here's a collage of some headlines. Here's Justin Bieber, a recent collage of the headlines that are coming at him right now. And I think the message is pretty clear. If they cannot control you, they will ruin you, okay? They'll say you are on drugs or say you're having a mental break. The timing of this discussion, by the way, is rather serendipitous because this week we're getting into our second book of my book club, which is Hollywood Babylon. And we had pre-picked this book, not knowing everything that would be going on with Justin Bieber and the conversation that we would be having. But this book really speaks about how Hollywood became Hollywood, about how it was founded. And if you believe Kenneth Anger, then Hollywood was definitively, that's the author of the book, Kenneth Anger, then Hollywood was definitively started by gang members. And I see no reason after having read this book to contradict anything that meaningfully contradicts what he says. The amount of deaths, the murders, the shootings, the convenient overdoses, the pornography, the blackmail. The book introduces us to all of the main players at that time: Paramount Studios, Metro Goldwyn, and Meyer, MGM. And it tells you who exactly was at the top of those studios, namely a guy named Joe Pasternak, Louis B. Mayer, and Sam Katz. These were the guys who were at the beginning of Hollywood. And I'm very much interested today in Joe Pasternak, right? Because I had begun wondering out loud to myself if it was plausible that this guy, who had everything to do with the founding of Hollywood, might be related to Harley Pasternak, the guy who was just gonna take Ye back to La La Land as a gym trainer. It just seems to me that every time I come across a connection to the CIA and Hollywood and mind control, I come across the last name Pasternak. Obviously, you saw last week, even when we were speaking about that declassified document from MK Ultra, the guy who we couldn't find a picture of, he was a Pasternak. And we have Joe Pasternak over in Hollywood who's running everything. And we know for a fact that he too worked with the CIA to popularize a book called Dr. Zhivago, which I should mention, that book was written by his Russian cousin. So Joe Pasternak and the author of this book, Boris Pasternak, were actually cousins. I found that out this weekend. A lot of Pasternaks in the mix when it comes to the CIA. Check out this 2014 headline from The Guardian pertaining to that book, Dr. Zhivago. It reads, the CIA used Dr. Zhivago as a literary weapon during the Cold War. And it tells us that more than 100 newly declassified documents in the U.S. have revealed how the CIA printed Russian language copies of Boris Pasternak's classic novel, Dr. Zhivago, during the Cold War in an attempt to sow unrest among Soviet citizens. The CIA published a hardback Russian language edition of Dr. Zhivago in the Netherlands and a miniature paperback edition at its own headquarters, making sure that, quote, the hand of the United States government was not to be shown in any manner, reveal the documents. It then pressed copies into the hands of Soviet citizens at the 1958 Brussels Universal and International Exposition, while agents who had contact with Soviet tourists and officials in the West passed out the miniature edition. Okay, so just to be clear, CIA began distributing copies of this book, Dr. Zhivago, throughout the USSR in the late 1950s as a weapon of war to make Soviets question their government and similarly to make us Americans and those in the West understand who our enemies were. Tale as old as time. They want to go to war with somebody. First, they have to propagandize us. Hollywood and the government have always had a unique relationship. Movies and songs that are being produced for the purpose of propaganda and social engineering. And this is where Joe Pasternak steps in. He would know because he's the person that made Dr. Zhivago a winning film in Hollywood, literally, okay? In 1966, Joe Pasternak put on the first ever color presentation of the Oscar Awards show. Okay, this is an actual article from that time. It says, Oscar show scheduled next Monday. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences will be throwing the book at its audience when the first color presentation of the annual Oscar show hits the nation's television screens the night of April 18th. And it mentions how this is being thrown on all throughout this article by Joe Pasternak, the producer of this year's Oscar cast. And guess what happened that year? Dr. Zhivago took home a ton of awards. It won for Best Art Direction, Best Color Cinematography, Best Art Design, Best Screenplay Writing, you name it, okay? So you can imagine that people at this time who had no idea that this was a government operation, which included Joe Pasternak and his cousin, okay? People at this time must have assumed that it was all organic. You go to the Oscars, you watch the Grammys, you think it's all organic. But in reality, the American population was being intentionally engaged in propaganda. So I hate to say this, but Kanye was right after all when he said that award shows are fake. They are fake. This is about social engineering. You are the product. Your mind is the product. So I started thinking over this weekend, what if we just stopped for 1 second accusing all of these artists of being crazy, and instead we started actually investigating some of the things that they've been saying, right? They've been saying, Kanye, for example, that there are gangs that still control Hollywood and that you aren't allowed to stand up to the gangs without being ruined financially, reputationally, and that at very convenient times, the world will suddenly learn that you're actually a drug addict or experiencing a mental break. Also, I have to just add this into the mix. Isn't it also sort of weird that it seems to be a common thread in all these stories that when people begin embracing Christianity, they're accused of suffering a psychotic break? Because that's what's happening to Justin Bieber right now. It's like he's drawing closer to Christ and we're being told, no, he's just lost his mind and he's a druggie and he's broke, okay? That seems weird. And that is specifically what Ye said happened to him. It was the reason he said that Harley put him in the hospital, because Ye began quoting the Bible and reading the Bible. And so he said, we got to call an ambulance if something's gone wrong with you. Here is Ye describing that moment.
Actually, the day when they put me in the hospital, I had started reading the Bible really heavy and rewriting Bible verses. And when the Jewish trainer saw, and you're like looking like, well, that sounds pretty bipolar. But the Jewish trainer saw that, put me in the hospital, and then said, and then put it in the press.
He's referring to Harley Pasternak, and Harley Pasternak then put it into TMZ that he had suffered a psychotic break when he was writing Bible verses. Now, Ye also tweeted this. He tweeted, quote, "I was told that if I expose the truth of the bad business practices, everything is going to be taken from me, including my black children. And everyone has now bore witness to the public Emmett tilling of Ye. But God has put something on my heart not to back down." Okay. And now that I'm thinking about it, it's weird because that's what happened to me too. Such a simple phrase. All I said was Christ is king. And my gosh, did I lose so much. Actually, quite frankly, I think I gained a lot. But it was a scandal that still won't die. There's still reports being produced by the likes of Jordan Peterson on why you can't say Christ is king, okay? It was followed by people who were trying to convince the public back in 2024 that I was suffering from a postpartum psychosis. I'm just showing you 3 tweets to that effect from last year because it's incredible to reflect upon. This person, Avi Weiss, is it possible that Candace is having postpartum psychosis? Joshua Nebo writes, "I've said it before and I'll say it again. Candace is suffering from legit psychosis and needs mental health intervention." Lastly, this person, Get Real, wrote in August, "Somebody get Candace some urgent psychological help. She's actually developing psychosis." What a weird trend. You just diagnose a person that you've never met and never seen, and they try to convince you that the people are having mental breaks when they say things they don't like. It's weird because it's almost like the people that are doing this are partaking in something that I wouldn't even call a faith, but clearly something that must run counter to Christ. It's interesting, even more so because Kenneth Anger, the author of Hollywood Babylon, was very much a member of the elite, and he said that they all worshiped the occult. So it ain't Judaism, it ain't Christianity, but it's the occult. And he would know because he was one of them until the day he died. He believed in black ceremonial magic. He believed in the occult, and he was interested in works pertaining to blood sacrifice. I mean, he's a total character, and yet somehow was allowed to become this like a big guy in Hollywood. But like I said, we'll get more into that in the book club, that that's not YouTube safe. But it is interesting, right? I should also mention that the media says that Kenneth Anger's book has long been debunked. So don't even think about it. Don't even think about reading it. Just kidding. We're going to read it anyways, because when the media says something has been debunked, it usually hasn't been. Anyways, I'm really starting to wonder now about Harley Pasternak, right? And if he somehow belongs in this Hollywood CIA link together family tree. So I'll tell you what I did. I decided to just put together a little family tree for Harley Pasternak, and I'll tell you what I found. First and foremost, like I told you, Harley blocked me on Instagram. Here's proof of that. This is what I see. I see no posts, and I thought it was so weird when I was going to go through every single post he's ever posted. Okay, fair. He knew what I was going to do. He knew he's watching the show. He knows I like timelines, but he blocked me. I thought that was weird, but I was able to find old posts of his, and I'm just beginning this process. Here's an old post about his time spent in the Canadian military. He wrote, "From 1994 to 1997, I was an exercise nutrition scientist in the military. I worked in a laboratory that focused on the effects of different drugs and foods on soldiers' ability to run faster, jump higher, and stay awake longer. I did not have a gun. I never rode in a tank. I never saw enemy fire, and my life was never in any danger. On the other hand, tens of thousands of brave men and women soldiers risk their lives to protect ours. I am eternally grateful to all of you who have served to protect our safety and freedom. Thank you so much." So yes, he was involved in drugging people and seeing what the effects of those drugs were. I also was able to find, while I was looking just briefly through his family tree, wondering if he could be related to Joe Pasternak of MGM or Boris Pasternak, his cousin. I found that he had mentioned that his grandma, Lucy, had survived the Holocaust. And I can show you that here, blocking out the faces of his family because it doesn't matter, but he's holding a picture of his grandmother, Lucy. And he said, "This photo is of my great-grandmother, Lucy Pasternak. She was from Transylvania and survived Auschwitz. A great deal of who I am today is because of who she was." Okay. I'm going to flag that for you because I was not able to confirm that information. And I'm going to show you this tree. because actually it's usually quite simple to confirm information as it pertains to the Holocaust. They've done an incredible job documenting all the victims. And I was able to confirm that her sister, Lucy's sister, allegedly survived Auschwitz, but I could not find Lucy herself. So I'm just asking the public to help me make that connection, because the contrary, I found interesting. I found information that it was just her sister. But anyways, this is his family tree. Harley Pasternak, again, we're working to confirm this. His parents are public. He has posted them publicly. They do work publicly. So this was not like a find where we were doxing someone or anything. His mother, Barbara, his dad's name is Joe. And what was really interesting is Joe's mother, as you can see here, is Lucy Pasternak. Her name was Litsi, formerly Moldovan. I was able to discover that her sister's name is Magda Adler, formerly Moldovan of Israel. I'll show you how. But then the grandfather, not a single trace. One mention on a site that his nickname may have been Shimmy, but I can't find a single trace of the grandfather. And I'm wondering if that grandfather could have been a son of the original Joe Pasternak. Hey, even looking at these dates, it's totally plausible that Joe Pasternak had an affair with Lucy. I don't know. I just feel like somehow this is supposed to connect, that this family tree is supposed to connect. If you're listening to this on audio, you're going to have to go onto YouTube and look at this family tree. But that missing grandfather kind of really bugs me. And so I'm going to ask you guys to send tips at CandaceOwens.com, because we then began looking into Lucy, thinking it's going to be very easy to find who her husband is. You're telling me you got an Auschwitz survivor, and you have kids that are very involved. Harley has a couple of brothers. They're all very involved. And I'm sure they've mentioned their grandfather somewhere. No, we couldn't find it, even in databases where we were able to find information about Lucy. And here's what we have found thus far on Lucy. His grandmother, who he says survived Auschwitz. Again, just looking for somebody to confirm that. Maybe she had a different name, but I only have her as Litsi. She went as Lucy, and I ain't got any other name there. So I'm very curious about that. We have Lucy mentioned in a newspaper as having owned an art gallery. This is a Canadian newspaper, and it's in Montreal, which makes sense. This is where Harvey is from, that she was the manager of a gallery in 1970. So a manager of a gallery on Ville Marie in Montreal, and she is just commenting on a portrait here. We have found that. We have Lucy again. We know this is the right person, mentioned in the birth of Harley's brother. And what's interesting about this, right? So it mentions his parents, Joe and Barbara, are proud to announce the arrival of their son, weighing 8 pounds, 13 ounces on January 19th of 1983 at 3:16 p.m. But it says first grandchild of Lucy Pasternak of Montreal. That's weird, because Harley was born. Harley's mentioned in the next line, brother Harley, mother and father doing fine. So how could it be Lucy Pasternak's first grandchild if Harley was born? Now this, it's a newspaper. They could have gotten something wrong. Special thanks to Dr. Bernstein and staff at Mount Sinai Hospital. Thought it was a weird typo, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that. Then we have the correct Lucy again in her obituary. And every obituary that we found, it didn't mention that she had survived Auschwitz, or that, you know, that she was a Holocaust survivor, which I flagged as very interesting. That's why I'm asking the public to send me information. I know there are people that dedicate their entire lives to documenting that stuff, and I've checked those websites. It says Lucy Pasternak on Tuesday does not mention her husband again. Lucy Pasternak, loving mother and mother-in-law of Joe and Barbara, devoted grandmother to Harley, Jesse, and Bobby, dear sister of Magda Adler of Israel. And then it tells us where the service is going to be. No mention of her late husband. That's a hole I gotta fill, guys. Okay? So I'm opening up tips at CandaceOwens.com, looking for that missing Pasternak that was married to Lucy, who Harley Pasternak says survived Auschwitz, and I have been unable to confirm that just yet. And like I said, the records on that are very tight. And usually it's a very quick, there's videos, lists, everything. And I could not find this woman, but I was able to find her sister and confirm that her sister, Magda Adler of Israel, survived the Holocaust. So you guys can help me with that. Pull up that chart again one more time so they can see it, because now I am really honing in on what's going on here in Hollywood, the CIA. You guys just take that. We are looking for this person who potentially went by the nickname Shimmy, which is what we were able to find on the site. Is it possible Joe and Lucy, like maybe it's not a great grandpa up there and it's Joe by a different name? He traveled extensively. I'm just wondering, it just seems weird not to include that in an obituary or to include that or speak about that publicly. But I'm thinking whatever is going on in Hollywood has been going on for a very long time. Now, what does this all mean? Well, first and foremost, it means it's time for you guys to wake up. I'll tell you that for free. It means that Justin Bieber is fighting a very scary private battle right now. Okay. If I am fearful for his life, it's not because I believe he's on drugs. I'll tell you that for free. It's because I've read too many of these books. I know too much about the late Joe Pasternak. I know too much about the founding of Hollywood. I know too much about all of these artists who conveniently have drug overdoses when they're at the peak of these fights. And now that these fights, like I mentioned to you, are taking place privately and through arbitration and not publicly, it actually puts these individuals more at risk. And I think that we really should begin by understanding who has been controlling Hollywood for a very long time. Because if we can connect Harley Pasternak to Joe Pasternak, and I think we're close here, then things are going to start to get very interesting. Very, very interesting. Anyways, you guys know me. I am on it either way. I appreciate